Good evening and welcome back to my channel. I am the Loyal Hufflepuff, and today we will continue our reading in Flora and Ulysses, written by Kate DiCamillo. This is a kid's book that was written, I would guess, back in 2018, so fairly recent. But it is a movie on Disney Plus that came out 2 years ago. This is 2023. It came out 2 years ago. The movie came out 2 years ago on Disney Plus. Last time I remember, there was a difference between the two. But for those that have seen the movie already and would like to talk about the difference, for those of you that have seen the movie already and have an opinion about whether you like the book or the movie, please comment down below on your thoughts on that. Without further ado, let us continue our reading in Flora and Ulysses. Flora's mother and father entered the kitchen together. Her mother had a cigarette in her mouth. Her mother was smoking. Her father had his arm around his mother's shoulder. This was almost as alarming as seeing her mother smoke. Her mother and father never touched it anymore. "Good news, Flora Belle," said her father. "Really?" said Flora. She never believed it when someone said there was good news. In her experience, there was good news. People just said what the good news was. If there was bad news that they wanted you to believe was good news, then they said good news. And if there was really bad news, they said good news, Flora Belle. "Your mother thinks that it'd be wonderful to have the squirrel stay here," said her father. "What?" said Flora. "Really? Here? With her? And where am I supposed to stay?" "Here," said her father, "with your mother. You, your mother, and the squirrel. That's what your mother would like." Flora looked at her mother. "Mom," she said. "I would be honored," said her mother. She took a long drag on her cigarette. Her hand was trembling. "Why are you smoking?" said Flora. "I thought you stopped smoking." "It seemed like the wrong time to stop," said her mother. She squinted. "I am under a lot of pressure right now. Speaking of which, I see that the squirrel is typing. On my typewriter. Where I write." "He writes poetry," said William Spiver. "Not fiction." "Let's just have a look-see," said Flora's mother. She walked over to the typewriter and stood looking down at Ulysses and at the words on the page. "Let's see what kind of poetry a squirrel types. Her voice sounded funny still, tinny and far away, as if she were speaking from the bottom of a dark well. Actually, what she sounded like was a robot, someone pretending to be human and doing a lousy job of it. Flora felt a little flicker of fear. "Let me just light another cigarette here," said her mother in her robot voice. She lit a new cigarette from the tip of the old one, which was, of course, chain smoking and dangerous behavior at the best of times. And this, obviously, was not the best of times. Her mother inhaled deeply on the cigarette. She exhaled. She said, "Shall I read the squirrel poetry aloud?" End of chapter 49. And here's a picture of her reading the squirrel's poetry and all that. So there it is. And we'll be continue on reading chapter 50. Actually, it wasn't poetry. Not yet. So far, it was just a list of words that he wanted to turn into a poem. The first word on the list was jelly. Jelly was followed by giant donut, which was in turn followed by sprinkle. The list continued with these words: Rita, sunny side up, Pascal, giant squid, little shepherdess, vanquished, capacious, quirk, universe, expanding, blunder Meeson, banished. The list ended with the words of Mr. Meesham's goodbye. "I promise to always turn back toward you." The words were The words were good words. Ulysses felt maybe even great words, but the list was very incomplete. He was just getting started. The words needed to be arranged, fussed with, put in the order of his heart. All this is to say that when Flora's mother read the list out loud, it didn't sound terribly impressive. Gosh, that's some swell poetry, said Buckman. Not really, said William Spiver. There's no point in lying to him. If if he is a squirrel, it's actually pretty lousy poetry. But I do like the last part, the part about returning back. That has some emotional heft to it. Well, I think it's just great, said Flora's mother, and I'm glad to welcome another writer into the family. She patted Ulysses on the head. Too forcefully, he felt. The pat approached violence. We are going to be one happy little family, said Flora's mother. She gave Ulysses another whack disguised as a pat. Really? Said Flora. Oh, yes, said Flora's mother. There was a knock at the back door. Yoo-hoo! Someone called out. Tootie! Thought Ulysses. Tootie! Said Flora. Mrs. Tickham, said Flora's mother. Do come in. We were just reading some words that the squirrel typed. Ha ha! We were reading some squirrel poetry. William, said Tootie, I've been calling and calling you. I didn't hear you. Well, I must admit that I wasn't calling very loudly, said Tootie. What did Ulysses type? Flora's mother read the list of words again. Tootie put her hand over her heart and said, Oh, those last lines are beautiful. Heartbreaking. Those last lines are the only bit of coherence in the whole thing, said William Spiver. I've been inspired by Ulysses to write a little poetry of my own, said Tootie. Ulysses felt himself puffed up. He had inspired Tootie. He turned and sniffed his tail. I'd like to read your poetry, Tootie, said Flora. Well, we should have a poetry reading at some point. I'm sure Ulysses would enjoy that. The squirrel nodded. Yes, yes, he would enjoy that. He would also enjoy a bite of cake, a bite to eat. Dr. Meacham's jelly sandwiches had been wonderful, but that was a long time ago. He would like to eat, and he would like for Tootie to read poetry to him, and he would like to work on his own poem. Also, he would like for Flora's mother to quit pounding him on the head, which she was doing again now. William, said Tootie, your mother called for you. Did she? said William Spiver. His voice was squeaky with hope. Really? Did she ask for me to come home? Unfortunately not, said Tootie. But it's dinner time. Come home with me and eat something. Home, thought Ulysses. That's a good word. And dinner is a good word too. He turned back to the typewriter. He searched for the H. End of chapter 50. We continue reading with chapter 51. Things were very strange. Her mother insisted that they sit together at the dining room table. The three of them. She also insisted that Ulysses sit in a chair, which was ridiculous, because if he sat in a chair, he wouldn't be able to reach the table. He can sit here with me, Flora, said Flora. Oh, no. I want him to feel welcome. I want him to know that he literally has a chair at our table. Her mother had held the chair out, and Ulysses had climbed onto it. And then she slid the chair all the way under the table. It was enough to break your heart, watching his whiskered, hopeful face as it disappeared beneath the tablecloth. If her mother hadn't been acting so strange, Flora would have said something, would have argued more vehemently. But her mother was acting strange, very, very strange. Not only was her voice robotic, she was also saying things that she never would have said before, expressing sentiments that seemed to be at odds with Mother Flora, the mother Flora had always known. For instance, wanting a squirrel to have a chair at the table. And here's those Ulysses at the dinner table. Wonder what that food is. Looks good. For instance, encouraging Flora to have a second helping of macaroni and cheese. For instance, saying nothing about Flora's potential stoutness as Flora consumed a second helping of macaroni and cheese. It was almost as if her mother were possessed. Terrible Things Can Happen to You had done an issue entitled Devils, Dibooks, and Curses. Apparently, throughout history, people who acted strange had been accused of being inhabited by the devil or a demon, or an alien from outer space. According to terrible things, these people were most likely not possessed. Rather, their psyches had been pushed by extraordinary events to the breaking point, and they had experienced a sort of nervous collapse. Flora's guess was that typing flying squirrel was much more than Flora's mother's psyche could manage. She had been pushed to the brink. She was suffering from some kind of nervous breakdown. Either that or she was possessed. Of course, Flora's father had been pushed to the brink too, but everything to do with Ulysses had affected him differently. It had cheered him up somehow. Maybe because the holy Bagumba-ness of it all had reminded him of Incandesto and Dolores, and also of the possibility of impossible things. "Can't I come live with you?" Flora had said to her father when he left that night. "Absolutely, you can come live with me," said her father, "but your mother needs you now." "She doesn't need me," said Flora. "She doesn't. She said that her life would be easier without me." "I think that your mother has forgotten how to say what she means," said her father. "Plus," said Flora, "she hates Ulysses. I can't live with someone who hates my squirrel." "Give her a chance," said her father. "Right," said Flora. As her father left the house that night, Flora had whispered the words of Dr. Meacham's goodbye to him, and even though there was no way he could hear her, Flora was disappointed when her father didn't turn around, back toward her. But anyway, here she was, giving her mother a chance, which, as far as Flora could tell, meant watching Phyllis Buckman use the candle on the dining room table to light cigarette after cigarette. Flora fully expected that at some point her mother's hair would catch on fire. What did you do when somebody's hair caught fire? It had something to do with a throw rug. You beat them over the head with a throw rug. That was it. Flora looked around for the dining room. Did they even own a throw rug? She caught sight of the little shepherdess standing at the bottom of the stairs. Marianne was looking at Flora and her mother with a jaded and judgmental eye. For instance, Flora agreed with the lamp. Things were out of control. Her mother said, "Well, it is such delight to spend time with the members of my family, rodent and otherwise. But my head hurts, and I think that I will go upstairs and rest my eyes for a while." "Okay," said Flora. "I'll clear the table." Lovely, so very thoughtful. After her strange mother climbed the stairs, Flora pulled back Ulysses' chair. He hopped on the table and considered the plate full of macaroni and cheese. He looked at Flora. "Go ahead," she said. "It's for you." He picked up a single noodle and held it in his paws, admiring it. Watching him, Flora suddenly remembered a panel from the Illuminated Adventures of the Amazing Incandesto. It was a picture of Alfred T. Slipper standing at a darkened window. His eyes were behind his back, and Dolores was on his shoulder, and Alfred was looking out the window and saying, "I am alone in the world, Dolores, and I am homesick for my own kind." The squirrel ate the noodle and picked up another one. There was cheese sauce on his whiskers. He looked happy. "I'm homesick," said Flora. "I miss my father." Ulysses looked up at her. "I miss William Spiver." Talk about a sentence you could never predict you would say. "I even miss my mother," thought Flora, "or I miss the person she used to be." It was dark outside. Her mother was upstairs. Her father was at the Blixen Arms. William Spiver was next door. The universe was expanding, and Flora Belle Buckman was homesick for her own kind. End of chapter 51, beginning chapter 52. He sat at the window of Flora's room and looked down at the sleeping Flora, and then up and out at the lighted windows of the other houses. He thought about the words he would like to add to his poem. He thought about the music at Dr. Meacham's house, the way the voices sounded, singing. He thought about the look on Mr. Claus's face when he went sailing backward down the hallway. Was there a word for that? Was there a word for all those things together? the lighted windows and the music, and the terrified, disbelieving look on a cat's face when he was vanquished. The squirrel listened to the wind blowing through the leaves on the trees. He closed his eyes and imagined a giant donut with sprinkles on top of it and, and cream inside of it. Or jelly, maybe. He thought about flying. He thought about the look on Flora's face when her mother said that life would be easier without her. What was a squirrel supposed to do with all these thoughts and feelings? Flora let out a small snore. Ulysses opened his eyes. He kept them open until the lights in the windows of the other houses went off one by one, and the world went dark except for a single street light at the end of the block. The street light fizzled into darkness, and then flared back to life, and then fizzled again. Darkness. Light. Darkness. Light. What, Ulysses wondered, does the streetlight want to say? He thought about William Spiver. He thought about the word banished and the word homesick. He imagined typing the words and watching them appear on the paper, letter by letter. Flora had told him before she went to sleep that she thought it would be a good idea if he didn't type anything for a while. At least not on her mother's typewriter. It seems to provoke her, she said. I think you're typing poems. And flying around the kitchen kind of made her have a nervous collapse or something. She had said this, and then she had given him a sad look and closed the door to the bedroom. I closed the door as a reminder, okay? No typewriter, no typing. And then there's a comic thing over here that says, but what was a closed door to a superhero? And you see him flying around, getting to the door, going down, going to the downstairs. And it says, you stupid little shepherdess. Goes to the typewriter and says, it was superhero time. Or something. And here's a little sketch right here. Hopefully you guys can see it. Give you a good time to look at the picture. Looks really cool. And all right. That was the end of chapter 52, beginning of chapter 53. Flora was dreaming. She was sitting on the bank of a river. William Spiver was sitting beside her. The sun was shining, and a long way off. There was a sign, a neon sign. There was a word on the sign, but Flora couldn't read it. What does the sign say? Flora asked. What sign? Said William Spiver. I'm temporarily blind. It was comforting to have William Spiver act just as annoying in a dream as he would in real life. Flora relaxed. She stared at the river. She had never seen anything so bright. If I were an explorer and I discovered this river, I would call it the Incandesto, said Flora. Think of the universe as an accordion, said William Spiver. Flora felt a prick of irritation. What does that mean? She said. Can't you hear it? Asked William Spiver. He tilted his head on to one side. He listened. Flora listened too. It sounded as if someone a long way off were playing a toy piano. Isn't it beautiful? Said William Spiver. It doesn't sound much like an accordion to me, said Flora. Oh, Florabelle, said William Spiver. You're so cynical. Of course it's an accordion. The sign was closer. It had moved somehow. The neon letters were blinking on and off, and on and off, spelling out the words, Welcome to Blundermeesen. Wow, said Flora. What? Said William Spiver. I can read the sign. What does it say? Welcome to Blundermeesen, said Flora. The piano music got louder. William Spiver took hold of her hand. They sat together on the banks of the Incandesto River. And Flora was perfectly happy. She thought, I don't feel homesick at all. She thought, William Spiver is holding my hand. And then she thought, I wonder where Ulysses is. End of chapter 53, beginning chapter 54. This beginning part is the cartoon, well, not cartoon, but the comic continuing with saying, he will defend the defenseless. He will protect the weak. He will write a poem. And then he looks back. Ulysses is writing. See? There he is right there. Writing out right there. Alright. and we'll continue reading. The kitchen was dark, lit only by the light above the stove. The squirrel was alone, but he had the strange feeling of not being alone. It was almost as if a cat were watching him. Had Mr. Claus tracked him down? Was he hiding in the shadows, waiting to exact his revenge? Cat revenge was a terrible thing. Cats never forgot an insult. Never, and to be thrown down a hallway, backward, by a squirrel was a terrible insult. Ulysses held himself very still. He put his nose up in the air and sniffed, but he didn't smell a cat. He smelled smoke. Flora's mother stepped out of the shadows and into the muted light of the kitchen. "So," she said, "I see you helped yourself to my typewriter again. Put your little squirrel paws all over it." She took another step forward. She put the cigarette in her mouth and reached out with both hands and yanked the paper from the typewriter. The roller screamed in protest. Flora's mother crumpled the poem, without looking at it, without reading one word of it, and dropped the paper on the floor. "So," she said. She exhaled a ring of smoke. The circle floated in the dim light of the kitchen, a beautiful, mysterious O. As he considered the cigarette smoke suspended in the air above him, Ulysses felt a wave of joy and sorrow, both things at once. He loved the world. He loved all of it. Smoke rings and lonely squids and giant donuts and Florabelle Buckham's round head and all the wonderful things inside of it. He loved William Spiver and his expanding universe. He loved Mr. George Buckman and his hat, and the way he looked when he laughed. He loved Dr. Measham and her watery eyes and her jelly sandwiches. He loved Tootie, who had called him a poet. He loved the stupid little shepherdess. He even loved Mr. Claus. He loved the world, this world. He didn't want to leave. Flora's mother reached past him and picked up a blank piece of paper and rolled it into the typewriter. "You want to type?" she said. He nodded. He did want to type. He loved typing. "Okay, let's type. You are going to type what I say." But that went against the whole point of typing what someone else said. "Dear Flora," said Flora's mother. Ulysses shook his head. "Dear Flora," said Flora's mother again in a louder, more insistent voice. Ulysses looked up at her. Smoke exited her nostrils in two thin streams. "Do it," she said. Slowly, the squirrel typed the words, "Dear Flora," and then, stunned into a dumb willingness, he typed every terrible, untrue word that came out of Phyllis Bookman's mouth. The squirrel took dictation. End of chapter 54, beginning chapter 55. When he was finished, Flora's mother stood over his shoulder, reading and nodding and saying, "That's right. That's right. That ought to do it. There are a few misspellings, but then you're a squirrel. Of course you're going to misspell things." She lit another cigarette and leaned against the kitchen table and considered him. "I guess it's time," she said. "Wait here. I'll be right back." And he did as she said. He waited. She left the kitchen, and he simply sat there, unmoving. It was as if she had put a spell on him. It was as if typing the lies, the wrong words, had depleted him of all ability to act. Once, long ago, in a garden in springtime, Ulysses had seen a squirrel made of stone, gray, hollow-eyed, frozen. In his stone paws he held a stone acorn that he would never get to consume. That squirrel is probably in the garden now, still holding that acorn, still waiting. "I am a stone squirrel," thought Ulysses. "I can't move." He looked over at the words he had typed. They were untrue words. Several of them were misspelled. There was no joy in them, no love, and worst of all, they were words that would hurt Flora. He turned slowly, he sniffed his tail, and as he sniffed, he remembered the words that Flora had shouted at him in the giant donut. "Remember who you are! You're Ulysses!" This helpful advice had been followed by a single powerful word: act. He heard the sound of footsteps. What should he do? What action should he take? He should type. He should type a word. But what word? And then you see him typing. Then you see no more typing, and then darkness. So you see right there, a little comic right there. Kind of intense. Getting into the book. Alright. Let's continue reading. Chapter 56. She woke with a start. The house was incredibly dark. So dark that Flora wondered if she had gone temporarily blind. Ulysses? She said. She sat up and stared in the direction of the door. Slowly the rectangular outline of it appeared, and then she could see that it was ajar. Ulysses? She said again. She got out of bed and went down the darkened stairs and past the little shepherdess. You stupid lamb, she said. She made her way into the kitchen. It was empty. The typewriter was unmanned or unsquirreled. Ulysses, said Flora. She walked over to the typewriter and saw a piece of paper glowing white in the dim light. Uh-oh, she said. She leaned in close. She squinted. Dear Flora, I am terribly fond of you, but I hear the call of the wild, and I must return to my natural habitat. Thank you for the macaroni and cheese. Yours, Mr. Squirrel. Mr. Squirrel? Call of the wild? Terribly fond? It was the biggest lie that Flora had ever read in her life. It didn't look like Ulysses had written it at all. Only at the very end did the truth appear. 2 letters. F and L. That was Ulysses. She knew. Trying to type her name one last time. Trying to tell her that he loved her. I love you too, she whispered to the paper. And then she looked around the kitchen. What kind of cynic was she, whispering, I love you, to a squirrel who wasn't even there? But she did love him. She loved his whiskers. She loved his words. She loved his happiness, his little head, his determined heart, his nutty breath. She loved how beautiful he looked when he flew. He felt her heart seize up. Why hadn't she told him that? She should have said those words to him. But that didn't matter now. What mattered was finding him. Flora hadn't been reading The Criminal Element for 2 solid years for nothing. She knew what was going on. The squirrel had been kidnapped by her mother. She took a deep breath. She considered what to do, what action to take. In the event of a true and genuine emergency, an absolute and undeniable crime, the authorities must be notified immediately, said the criminal element. Flora was certain that this was a true and genuine emergency, an absolute and undeniable crime. Still, it didn't seem like a good idea to notify the authorities. If she called the police, what would she say? My mother kidnapped my squirrel? The criminal element. If for some reason the authorities are not accessible to you, you then must seek help in other quarters. Whom do you trust? Whom do you know to be safe, to be a safe port in a storm? Flora suddenly remembered her dream. How warm William Spiver's hand had felt in her own. She blushed. Whom did she trust? Good grief. She trusted William Spiver. End of chapter 56, beginning of chapter 57. It was 2:20 a.m. The grass was heavy with dew. Flora was picking her way through the darkness. She was breathing heavily because she was carrying Mary Ann in her arms. And Mary Ann, for all of her pink cheeks and delicate features and excessive stupid frilliness, was incredibly heavy. Talk about stout, thought Flora. The criminal element. Can one reason with a criminal? This is debatable, but it is true that the rules of nursery school are often in good effect in the criminal world. What do we mean by this? We mean that if the criminal has something you want, then you must have something he wants. Only then is it possible for some kind of discussion to begin. There was nothing and no one that Flora's mother loved more than the lamp. Together, Flora and William Spiver would find her mother. They would offer to exchange the little shepherdess for the squirrel. And then all would be well, or something. That was Flora's plan. But first, she had to find William Spiver, and she didn't think that it would be a good idea to ring Tootie's doorbell at 2:20 a.m. "William Spiver?" said Flora. Where Here she was, standing in the dark holding an unlit lamp, and hoping that a temporarily blind boy would hear her call his name, and come help her rescue her squirrel. A squirrel who, for a superhero, sure did seem to need a lot of rescuing. Things were pretty grim. "William Spiver?" she said again. "William Spiver!" And then, without really intending to, she started saying William Spiver's name over and over, louder and louder and louder. "William Spiver, William Spiver, William Spiver, William Spiver, William Spiver, William Spiver." There was no way he would be able to hear her. Of course, she knew that, but she couldn't make herself stop. She just stupidly, idiotically, hopefully, kept saying his name. "Florabelle? William Spiver, William Spiver, William Spiver. Florabelle? William Spiver, William Spiver, William Spiver. Florabelle." And there he was, standing at a darkened window, conjured, apparently, by her need and her desperation, and her words, "William Spiver." Or at least the shadow of William Spiver. "Oh," said Flora. "Hello." "Yes, hello to you too," said William Spiver. "How lovely of you to visit in the middle of the night." And then here's the picture of him looking out the window and her calling out William Spiver with the porcelain shepherdess. "There's been an emergency," said Flora. "Right," said William Spiver. "Just let me put on my bathroom robe." Flora felt a familiar prick of irritation. "It's an emergency, William Spiver. There's no time to waste. Forget about your bathrobe." "I'll just put on my bathrobe," said William Spiver, as if she hadn't said anything at all. "And I'll be right there, wherever there is." It is shockingly difficult to locate even the most obvious things when one is temporarily blind. The world is very hard to navigate when you can't see. Although, to be perfectly frank, I had trouble navigating the world even before the advent of the blindness. I've never been what you would call coordinated or spatially intelligent. It's not even that I bump into things. It's more than that things leap out of nowhere and bump into me. My mother says this is because I live in my head as opposed to living in the world. But I ask you, don't we all live in our heads? Where else could we possibly exist? Our brains are the universe. Don't you think that's true, Florabelle? I said it's an emergency. Well then, I'll just put on my bathrobe, and we'll sort it all out. Flora put Marianne down on the ground. She looked around wildly in the darkness. What was she looking for? She didn't know. Maybe a stick that she would use to hit William Spiver over the head? "Florabelle? Ulysses is gone," she screamed. "My mother kidnapped him. I think my mother is possessed. I think she might hurt him." "Do not cry," she told herself. "Do not cry. Do not hope. Do not cry. Just observe." "Shh," said William Spiver. "It's okay, Florabelle. I'll help you. We'll find him." And then the light in William Spiver's room came on, and Tootie said, "What in the world are you doing, William?" "Looking for my bathrobe." "Tootie to the rescue!" The words appeared above Tootie's head in a neon kind of brightness. Tootie, shouted Flora. "It's an emergency. My mother has kidnapped the squirrel." "Flora?" said Tootie. She stuck her head out the window. Why do you have that awful lamp?" "It's complicated," said Flora. "Again, with the lamp?" said William Spiver. "What in the world is the meaning of the lamp?" "My mother loves the lamp," said Flora. "I'm holding it hostage." "Desperate times call for desperate measures," said Tootie. "That's right," said Flora. "It's an emergency." "I'll just get my purse," said Tootie. End of chapter 57. There's a picture of Tootie right there. Alright. And it was 57, 58. Last chapter for tonight. It was dark. Very, very dark. and there was the smell of smoke. Flora's mother had him in a sack, and the sack was flung over her back, and she was walking somewhere, and it was very, very dark. At the last minute, Flora's mother had picked up the piece of paper with his poem on it, and thrown it into the sack along with him. Was this meant as a kindness? Was she mocking him? Or was she merely covering her tracks? The squirrel didn't know, but he held the crumpled ball of paper on it to his chest, and tried to comfort himself. He thought, worse things have happened before. Worse things have happened to me. He tried to think of what they were. There was the time the pickup truck had run over his tail. That had hurt very much. There was also the incident with the BB gun, and the teddy bear, and the garden hose, the slingshot, the bow and rubber arrow. But everything that had happened before paled in comparison to this because there was so much more to lose now. Flora and her round and lovable head, cheese puffs, poetry, giant donuts. Shoot. He was going to leave the world without ever having tried a giant donut. And Tootie. Tootie had said that she was going to read poetry out loud to him. That would never happen now. That would never happen now either. It was dark in the sack. It was very dark everywhere. I'm going to die, thought the squirrel. He hugged his poem closer, and the paper crackled inside. This is nothing personal, Mr. Squirrel, said Flora's mother. Ulysses held himself very still. He found this sentiment difficult to believe. It really has nothing to do with you, said Flora's mother. It's about Florabelle. She is a strange child, and the world is not kind to the strange. She was strange before, and she's stranger now. Now she is walking around with a squirrel on her shoulder, talking to a squirrel, talking to a typing flying squirrel. Not good at all. Was Flora strange? He supposed so. But what was wrong with that? But she was strange in a good way. She was strange in a lovable way. Her heart was so big, it was capacious, just like George Buckman's heart. Do you know what I want? Said Flora's mother. Ulysses couldn't imagine. I want things to be normal. I want a daughter who is happy. I want her to have friends who aren't squirrels. I don't want her to end up unloved and all alone in the world. But it doesn't matter, does it? It does matter, thought Ulysses. It's time to do what needs to be done, said Flora's mother. She stopped walking. Uh-oh, thought Ulysses. End of chapter 58, and we'll pick up next week with, I think it's the final chapters. Let me check really quick. It's 59. Yeah. So next week we will be done with this book by next week. I hope you all enjoyed this. I'll make sure to post it on YouTube, and I'll make sure, well, not YouTube. I'll make sure to post it on my channel, and yeah, we're almost done with this book. Next week will be our last time reading it, and I hope you all have a wonderful night. Tomorrow I will continue reading Siege and Storm. Tomorrow. I said next week, yeah. Tomorrow I'll be continue reading Siege and Storm, and that's gonna be like this once a week. I'll pick another children's book. But if you guys enjoyed this, please comment down below if you have another suggestion of another book to read on every Tuesday. Every Tuesday I consider it to be children's book day. Just every once a week. So if you guys want to suggest a children's book to me, please comment down below. If you want to help support this channel and not quite support, but you know what I mean. If you guys are liking my channel, please like it and subscribe to my channel for more updates. And next week will be our final part for this book. Until next week, I'm the Loyal Hufflepuff, and I hope you all have a wonderful evening.